Hi, welcome to TSAM Digital. Today I have with me Mikkel Bates. Mikkel is the Regulatory Manager at FE Fundinfo. Mikkel, could you please give us a quick overview about FE Fundinfo and let our audience know a little bit about yourself?
Sure. FE Fundinfo is a global data and technology solutions provider to the asset management industry. I am the Regulatory Manager, as you say. I've been looking after monitoring global regulations for FE Fundinfo for about 8 years now, and relating that to our commercial team for providing data solutions to the industry.
Can we start by clarifying what the situation is with existing and new rules and regulations since the end of the Brexit transition period?
Sure. The simplest way to look at it is that if it was in place in the EU before the end of December 2020, when we came to the end of the transition period, then it was transcribed into UK law and applied here from the 1st of January this year. So in the fund world, that means that all the regulations and directives like MiFID II, PRIPS, UCITS, AIFMD, benchmark regulation, and so on, that applied in the UK before the 31st of December still apply now. The one missing from that list, as many will know by now, though, is the Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulation, or SFDR. Because that regulation was in train last year, having been passed by the European Parliament at the end of 2019, a lot of fund groups and financial advisors in the UK started to incorporate it in their plans. But because it wasn't scheduled to come in force until March this year, which was after the end of the transition period, it was out of scope for the UK. Over the course of this year, the UK has started to move on and make changes to what was in place, where it was felt there was room for improvement or to make them more relevant for the UK market. And in terms of unwinding the existing rules allowing cross-border activity, the FCA set up the temporary permissions regime, allowing those EU firms who were doing business in the UK before the end of the Brexit transition period, and those funds marketed here, to sign up to do so for up to 3 years, or until they're given the landing slot by the FCA to apply for direct authorization, or to then bow out gracefully. The EU, on the other hand, has been stricter, insisting that UK-based UCITS funds, which previously had passporting rights into EU countries, lost those rights and are now technically third country AIFs, even if the UK still ensures they apply the UCITS directive in terms of investment and borrowing powers, because there's no equivalence between the UK and EU in financial services.
Brilliant. And what are some of the key differences you have seen between the UK and EU on the financial regulations this year?
It's mostly down to the Financial Services Act, which was passed in the UK in April and was pretty wide-ranging, making changes to things like the market abuse regulation, the benchmarks regulation, and the PRIPS regulation, as well as laying the groundwork for the investment funds prudential regime and the UK implementation of Basel III on capital requirements, and essentially giving the Treasury and the FCA more control over matters in the UK. Included in the changes to the existing EU regulations were things like the FCA having the power to arrange the orderly wind down of critical benchmarks, such as LIBOR, which is pretty relevant at the moment, and to extend the transition period for third country benchmarks by 3 years to the end of 2025. On the market abuse side, the changes are largely around the practical application of the regulation and removing any ambiguities. And then on PRIPS, there are 3 specific changes. One was about the clarification of what was in scope of the regulation, while the other 2 changes were really significant from an operational perspective. One, which permitted the extension of the UCITS KID exemption for up to 5 more years, which is to the end of 2026, or sooner if an alternative is found that works for both PRIPS and UCITS. And the other paves the way for changes to the much criticized future performance scenarios. On the last point, we and many others felt, or at least hoped when it came to the consultation paper from the FCA, that this would mean the inclusion of past performance, particularly as the European regulators had said that they would like to be able to include past performance on a PRIPS KID, but were hamstrung by the regulation, which of course no longer applies in the UK. However, when the consultation from the FCA came out on the future of PRIPS KIDs in the UK, which closed on the end of September, they proposed removing the future scenarios, but not including past performance, and instead replacing the scenarios with narrative explanations about the factors likely to affect performance in future. This is an interesting proposal for 2 reasons. First, the trend has been to use more visual disclosures on the basis that consumers find them easy to understand than blocks of text. So putting narrative in wasn't likely to be that appealing. And secondly, filling a kid with free text makes it harder for consumers to compare different products, which after all is one of the aims of a kid. But as I said, the consultation has closed, and it will be interesting to see how the final rules look, and equally important, when they'll come into effect, because that's a big open question at the moment.
Great. And my last question to you, Mikkel, is the big story right now is ESG, or sustainable investment. Can you give us a quick overview of the different approaches being taken in the EU and the UK?
Sure. As I said a moment ago, it came as something of a surprise when it was announced quite late in 2020 that the European ESG regulations, the SFDR and the taxonomy regulation, would not apply in the UK, but it would have involved a conscious decision to adopt them, given that they were not going live until after the end of the Brexit transition period. So instead, we now have two very different sets of rules in Europe and the UK. Let's look first at what the rules are in Europe. Listed companies, banks, and insurance companies with over 500 employees are required by the Non-Financial Reporting Directive to report sustainability information. And this directive introduced the concept of double materiality, and whereby companies need to consider both the impact of sustainability issues on their business and also the impact business on the environment. The NFRD is in the process of being replaced by the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, or CSRD, which broadens the companies in scope to something like 50,000 across the Europe as a whole. The taxonomy regulation, which starts to kick in on the 1st of January 2022, is a classification system that spells activities across a whole range of industries are deemed to be sustainable in the context of 6 specific environmental objectives, the first 2 of which are climate change mitigation and climate change adaptation. Fund groups will need to disclose how closely aligned their investments are with those objectives, and the other 4 objectives on biodiversity, water, pollution prevention, and a circular economy will come in a year later at the beginning of 2023. Alongside the taxonomy regulation is the SFDR, which sets out what funds and groups need to disclose, both pre-contractually and annually thereafter in periodic reports, depending on whether they promote ESG characteristics, whether they have sustainability as an objective, or neither. Ironically, although the regulation is about disclosure, the SFDR has become more of a classification system for funds, as it introduced the idea of what are now known as Article 6, Article 8, and Article 9 funds. While the definition in these articles are meant to be triggers for different levels of disclosure, they have become categories for funds in themselves and are synonymous with what are otherwise known as brown, light green, or dark green funds. The SFDR came into effect in March this year, but the detailed disclosure templates from the RTS, the Regulatory Technical Standards, won't apply until next year. Now, the UK has taken a completely different approach, preferring to align its reporting requirements with the principles set out by the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosure, another abbreviation, the TCFD. Asset managers, life assurers, and pension providers need to disclose the metrics they're using to ensure they reach net zero by 2050 and how they're delivering against those targets. As in Europe, reporting needs to be done at both company and fund level, with the largest groups caught from the start of 2022 and others following later. So the key differences between the UK and EU approaches to ESG are the UK is focused, to start with at least, entirely on climate issues, i.e. the E of ESG, while the EU requires disclosures on ES and G, although the FCA has said that it expects its ESG sourcebook, which it's launching soon, to expand into other areas over time. And the UK approach is much more principles-based, focusing on the outcomes rather than the process, while the EU approach is quite rigid, setting out strict templates to be completed. Both the UK and EU say that they're well aware of the need to combat greenwashing, and that's a key priority for them, but they are coming at it from opposite ends.
Thank you very much, Mikkel, for all of this useful information. Hopefully our audience have enjoyed, and please do visit FE Fundinfo at TSAM London Live next week. Thank you.
Thank you.